Hello, everyone.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Steve, do you want us to keep our cameras off? Would that be best other than you and Jill?
No, I think having your camera on would be good. I mean, it's up to you, whatever you feel comfortable with. I think I saw you walking down Hamilton Road the other day. Were you walking?
Probably. Probably.
Yeah, I honked at you.
Oh, did you really?
I did, yeah.
Do it again. I'll notice.
Yeah. So somebody named Moose wants to enter the, not sure who that is.
I think
I
that-
don't know who that is either.
Well, I think we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. I think we have about 70 or so folks joining us on YouTube. And I just want to kind of describe how the process will work tonight. We will do a brief question or a brief presentation before question and answers. You can put your questions in the YouTube chat. And Jill Elliott, our assistant superintendent, will moderate the questioning. When there is similar questions, she may combine them so that we can get through as many questions as possible. And I'm really grateful to Tracy Clay and Catherine Hope Cunningham and Jessica Williams for being with us tonight. Do you guys want to say hello real quick? So Tracy is and Jessica and Catherine are part of our Master Facilities Committee, and so is Jill. And we're going to talk about that committee's work tonight. So if you guys want to just wave, say hello, and all right.
Hi,
So
Everybody.
we're ready to get started. I'm going to start with a presentation. So our Master Facilities Committee has been at work. I joined it when I joined the district in August of 2016, but the work, there was considerable work that went on before that. And the committee has been tasked with how to develop a phase 1 and 2 plan to deal with the growth we're experiencing with the building that's happening in Jefferson Township. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. We'll try to keep our presentation on the bond/operating levy that'll appear on the November 3rd ballot. We'll try to keep it brief so that you can ask your questions and we'll collectively together try to answer them. And members of the Master Facilities Committee, you can, as I go through this presentation, if you would like to add some commentary, please feel free to do so. So we'll go ahead and get started. So phase 1 of our plan, which the bond/operating levy passed in 2018 in May, and that was to provide for a new Lincoln Elementary, and that building will be ready in at the beginning of next school year, the 21-22 school year. Also part of the bond issue was to renovate K-8 classrooms, media centers, and restroom renovations, and we're well on our way to doing that work. Lots of work has been done the last 2 summers, and so all classrooms got new furniture last summer. We've done flooring in several of our schools, lighting, LED lighting in all of our schools. And I think all of our media centers and K-8 buildings have been completed except Jefferson Elementary. And so we've also done many restroom renovations, but that's a project that we'll continue to work on next summer and should finish up. The other part of phase one was to do community engagement to create a workable solution to Gahanna Lincoln High School. We know that the high school is old, parts of it are 90 plus years old. And logistically, there's a lot of issues with capacity when the bell rings and we're in the hallways. There's a lot of trouble for students moving from one class to another. Our cafeterias can't hold enough students. So we don't have room for everyone to eat at school each day. And so we'll get more into that as we go. And one of the other things we promised to do was an enrollment study to sort of predict our future growth, which is going to accelerate. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. So one question we're using tonight to kind of frame our discussion is, what are our facility needs across the district? And really our needs are driven by growth. And so we'll talk about that here in this slide. So as you see,
Mr. Barrett,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we can't see this slideshow.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Let me go back. I apologize. I thought I'm more used to Google Meets. So let me see if I can. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, just hit
Okay.
presentation mode. Yep, hit
Okay.
present.
Got you. Thank you. So the question that we're using to frame our facility needs across the district is, what are the facility needs that we're looking at? And most of that is driven by the growth we're experiencing. And so as you see here, what's in red, we're at or over capacity in most of our buildings. I think the only building we're not over capacity in is Chapel Field Elementary. And so if you look here in 2016, we were at 116, or sorry, 2019, we're at 116% capacity at K-5, 104 at 6-8, and so on. This year, 118% and 108%. Curiously enough, at 108% at the middle school level. Curiously enough, it looks like we're not over capacity at the high school, but we'll show you as we go through the presentation how we really are. Clark Hall has stemmed some of the overcrowding in terms of classroom space, but we're definitely over capacity as soon as the bell rings, and I'll show you that in a second. So as we go through this presentation, one thing to think about is this is class change at Lincoln High School from the third floor of Hamilton to the first floor. And I'm not going to play this whole video. This presentation will be available on our website. Sorry, let me see here. Go back and play that. So this is what kids experience every day as they move from the third floor or the first floor to the third floor and vice versa. And this video was done by Mark Lowry in our media class and made by students. And it takes about 3 minutes to get from the first floor to the third floor and vice versa. And then students have to traverse across the whole building to get to class. And so what Mark and his students did was they sped this up 300%. And you can see that each day our kids are pretty patient with one another, but it takes a long time to move through the hallways from one class to another. So, you know, our cafeteria is overcrowded, and our hallways are definitely overcrowded. I'm gonna stop the video and just talk about a second about, you know, what we would like to do for our high school is we'd like to create safety and efficiencies, 21st century learning spaces, much like Clark Hall. And we would like to create better logistics so students don't have to experience what you saw in the video here. Kevin Dingle, our orchestra teacher, was involved in some of our community conversation, and he said by the time he starts class every day, he starts about 5 to 6 minutes late because students have trouble getting to class on time. The second question we'd like to address tonight is, what are the recommendations that our Master Facilities Planning Committee came up with? Worked really hard, and what we tried to do was keep in mind that we wanted to have neighborhood schools, and we know our community values our neighborhoods and neighborhood schools, and so our growth at the elementary level and really all levels is happening in Jefferson Township. And so the recommendation is to do additions to Blacklick and High Point Elementary. That would mean 10 additional classrooms at each, new art and music classrooms, extending the cafeterias, and increased office space. So the square footage additions are there at the bottom, 22,000 and 23,000 respectively at High Point and Blacklick. The benefits of this recommendation is to create extra space for 225 students. I think it's really important to keep in mind that the first or second slide you saw and how overcrowded we already are. So this growth that is putting us over capacity has already happened, and it's going to continue to happen. And here you see a trailer at High Point Elementary, and this is something that we're not wanting to do any further. That trailers are really not the way to serve students best, and they're very expensive to put in and to operate. And so what these additions would do would be to eliminate overcrowding, to abolish the need for trailers, to create flexible learning spaces and increase our cafeteria space. At the middle school level, the recommendations are to do additions to all 3 of our middle schools. Middle School East would take 7 classrooms, Middle School South 10, and Middle School West 7 classrooms. New art and music classrooms would be added. We would extend the cafeteria space in each. We would put additional special education spaces, and we would increase office space as well. And you can see the square footage additions at the bottom of this slide. The benefits of these additions would be to eliminate overcrowding, create flexible learning spaces, increasing cafeteria space, and provide space for future growth. And whenever you do renovations or you build new, there's always new security enhancements you can also build in. What framed our thinking around considerations for Lincoln High School were lots of community input. So we'll talk about that a little further into the presentation, but the committee talked about revisiting the 3-phase approach to the master facilities plan. We know that building a 4,000 square foot high school to house, eventually our growth will hit the pinnacle growth will be at about 2,800 students. That's going to be, require a 400,000 square foot high school, and that's very expensive. So we considered doing the renovations at the elementary and middle school and then saving the high school for later. But in our coffees in 2018 and our community conversations, just about everybody we talked to thought that we needed to address the high school sooner, and then waiting 10 years to do it in phase 3 would not be appropriate. We also wanted to visit the notion that some in our community feel like we should have a second high school to complement Lincoln High School. So we looked at that as a committee. We looked at saving parts of the current high school, so the gym and the auditorium, which are very functional spaces. And then we also considered community input in several meetings we had in January and February. These community conversations were really engaging. Folks came in and they sat at tables and they brought their ideas. They cross-pollinated ideas with others. There was a lot of movement in the meeting, and people were able to present their ideas in a collaborative setting. And so what we learned, the themes from these communications were as follows. So what we heard again and again was we needed to build one high school on the current site. We heard that there were people in the meetings who thought we should have a second high school, but when we entered the discussion, what they found out is that, you know, to build equity and to have the same sort of access for all students, we would have had to renovate the current Lincoln High School, which was untenable in terms of the cost and having school while the renovation took place. So there was no way we could create equity by building a brand new high school somewhere else in our community and then renovating a high school that is nearly, in parts, 90 years old to look similar. And so once folks talked that through, I think quickly they thought, you know, that a one high school solution was really important. One of the things we value in our community is equity and access and diversity, and building a second high school would have compromised that a great deal. The other thing we looked at is a theme in these meetings was to design a state-of-the-art campus-style structure around 21st century learning. So when you think of Clark Hall and how flexible and beautiful those spaces are, that was something that the folks that attended these 4 meetings thought was really important. The other thing is to include excellent performing arts and athletic spaces, and an athletic field house was a big theme we heard about. And the field house idea was not just something that would benefit Lincoln High School students, but our whole community. When you look at Hilliard and Olentangy and other districts around Central Ohio, many have field houses that are used by the whole community. Pee Wee basketball teams get to use them, and they're often used from morning until night. And we think that would happen in Gahanna as well. One of the things we heard again and again in these meetings was we needed to incorporate more vocational learning options on the high school site. We know we have a great partnership with Eastland Fairfield. They have many programs that are fantastic. They have 3 satellite programs at Clark Hall. Those programs are populated mostly by Lincoln High School students. And what parents expressed in these meetings is they wanted their kids to take advantage of these vocational programs, but they, you know, didn't want them to lose the high school experience with their friends and get on a bus and go all the way to Eastland. So creating more satellite programs in a new high school was something that folks that attended these meetings thought was really important. And the other thing is integrating security and safety enhancements that would eliminate the need for students to cross Hamilton Road for classes at Clark Hall. We heard again and again in our 2018 coffees and in discussions with parents and community members, the concern about crossing the street at Clark Hall, especially in the winter months when it's dark. And so building a high school on the current high school site was appealing to parents because we would eliminate the need to cross the street to go to Clark Hall. So the committee worked on recommendations for the high school, and here's what it came up with. So a new high school on the current site for an additional 600 students. Right now, we have just over 2,200 students. We need to build for a pinnacle growth of 2,800 students. And so there is enough room on the practice fields. Once we tear down the current Lincoln Elementary, there would be plenty of room to build and to do so in a way that was not disruptive to the school day over the 4 years it would take to build the high school. So what else this included was a performing arts center, athletic center with a field house, expanded cafeteria space, additional vocational programming, like I said earlier, and approximately 130 state-of-the-art classrooms. And then parking is always a problem at our high school, and then having ample parking for students and community members attending events. And the ability to hold school while building occurs. So we're working with an architectural firm, Moody Nolan, and they're experts at building in tight spaces and doing that building in as least a disruptive way as possible. And they've shown us some things that, some possibilities for the current acreage, and we'll talk about those at the next 3 meetings that that we're going to have around this ballot issue. You know, we think Lincoln High School in particular, we're a one high school town, and we think it will create a rallying cry. It's a source of pride for our community. It is virtually in the center of our community on Hamilton Road, and we think it's important to keep the diversity we have, make sure there's equity and access for all students, and the committee and the themes that came out of our community conversations supported that. You know, making sure that we still have excellence in our athletic programs, our arts programs, and our high school curriculum. We have one of the most diverse high school curriculum you can have in terms of the courses we offer. And it's really something that we value and we want all students to have access to. And if you had a second high school, it'd be hard to emulate that at 2 different high schools. So what I'd like to do now is talk about the costs of these recommendations. What the cost for the phase 2 plan to do all 3 parts would be 19 million, almost $20 million at the elementary level, about 31 million, a little over 31 million for the middle school level, and at the high school level, 198 million. So the total cost would be $250 million for all 3 levels of phase 2. What would that cost voters? As we look at financing this project, it is a lot of millage. We recognize that. The bond issue would be 4.93 mils. We would have to combine it with another funding mechanism, a PI levy of 1.5, and then an operating levy to deal with our growth. As we grow, we're going to need to hire more teachers, more administrators, more counselors, more mental health specialists, and that is a cost that will continue to grow. We've also experienced reductions from the state. We just had 1.6 million reduced in May of 2020. And Mike Verlingo, our treasurer, who's on the YouTube chat, projects that we'll have further reductions as the state budget continues to be affected by unemployment and COVID-19. We'll have further reductions, we think, in the future. The 1.6 million reduction represents about 2% of our overall budget and 11% of our state funding. So this 10.69 millage is about $31 per month on a $100,000 house, or $374 annually. We realize that the average price per home in Gahanna is about $220,000. So we don't have too many homes in Gahanna that are worth only $100,000. So we know this is an expensive proposition for our community. When we look at the millage, when we compare it to other districts, we're in orange, so we're 15th in our area of the schools you see on the screen. We're about 44.10 mils. And you can see, you know, districts with newer facilities have higher effective mills, and some even have income tax levies as well funding their schools. We don't have that. And I think it's important to point out that we have done a really good job focusing on the classroom in Gahanna, making sure there's enough teachers, enough counselors, enough principals, enough support staff to run our buildings and offer excellent education. But where we've fallen behind our peers in locally and across the state is the dollars we put into our facilities. In 2014, the community passed a permanent improvement levy that helps us a great deal. We've been able to do a lot of work with the $3 million we get every year. And so you can see if you've driven by Middle School West, we have a new track going in. We renovated the auditorium there, flooring there, HVAC system there. We've done HVAC systems with that PI levy at Goshen Lane, Royal Manor, Middle School West, and Chapel Field. We've done lots of projects to, enhance the systems in buildings. You don't often get to see, the result of that. You don't really get to see an HVAC system, but you certainly feel it, and it makes teaching and learning more comfortable. But this work has been deferred for many, many years, and we're finally getting caught up. And that $3 million a year helps us a great deal. What we'd like to do is move into questions, but I want to open it up a little bit to our committee members. So Tracy, Catherine, and Jessica, if you would like to say anything about anything we talked about before we go into the question and answer period, that would be great.
I'll start.
Okay.
I'm Tracy Clay. I teach at Middle School West. I've been there about 17 years. I have lived in Gahanna well over 30 years. Both my kids went through Gahanna schools and graduated, and my son is actually teaching at Middle School West. So it's just a little introduction. I just want to say, as a citizen of Gahanna and somebody who will have to help pay for this levy, it was not done lightly. So I sometimes feel like when I talk to people in the community and people at school that it was just kind of like this greedy, oh, we want all new things. And why are we doing it during COVID? And it just, the ball was rolling before COVID came around. And to stop the ball rolling, there was one small window that could have happened. But we realized as a committee, after spending over a year really struggling with what we needed to do, that if we don't put it on the levy this fall, and we push it to next year, every year we were seeing the cost of construction go up. And I didn't know anything about that. I'm just a teacher. I don't do money. I don't do construction. So that was all kind of new for me, that even when we were going through the whole process with Lincoln Elementary and the new build, that we thought we had this great plan. The architects gave it to us. We were all, we were moving ahead. And then it came to a grinding halt because of construction cost. And so that was a big part of feeling like we just have to put it before the community. We know it's a huge ask. We are not glibly doing that or thinking that it's not a big deal. It was gut wrenching in many, many of our meetings, trying to figure out what to do, what to cut, how to present it to the community, and what would be reasonable. And this was what we came up with, even though it doesn't sound reasonable, I get that. But when we put it in this November and it's on the ballot, it's really, we're okay with what the community says. This is your community, it's your high school. But we heard over and over and over again that even in middle school and elementary school, we visit other districts, is what we were told. And their buildings are not in disarray. They're not falling apart. They don't have parts of doors falling off. And it was time for us to take some pride in our buildings at Gahanna. So I just want to say it was gut wrenching. We had, I won't say knockdown dragouts, but we had some really heated conversations, because I always came from it. I'm married to an accountant, so I always came from it. Is there any way to cut this? Is there any way to cut this? This is too much money. To realizing that we really feel like this is what the community asked for in the meetings, and it would be wrong to not at least put it on the levy and give you a chance to say if this is what you want. So thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. And Jessica and Catherine are here as well, and they're part of the committee. And what I put up here just to talk about for a second is the consideration we did when I talked earlier in the presentation about renovation. We were very conscious of square footage price. Prices in the construction market have been skyrocketing over the last few years. So it used to be they went up sort of 3% a quarter, but 3% a year, and they've been going up 3% a quarter or 12% a year. So we were really conscious of maybe trying to renovate parts of the high school that were maybe usable and functional, and building space out that would be, instead of, a high square footage price for new, it's a little bit less to renovate. Does anybody from the committee want to talk about the process? So what you see in here in blue is what we would have had to renovate to get to 400,000 square feet. And then the red would be, demoed. And that was a really heart-wrenching meeting when we talked about this. Do any of you want to talk about that for a minute, just to give folks watching an idea of how difficult this consideration was?
I'll jump in again, and then I will try not to jump in, but this was probably the meeting that had the most passion, especially from me, because I just felt like we were going to bring too big of an ask to the community. So I was asking, like, why don't we renovate? Like, you think instead of tearing your house down and rebuilding, you renovate because it's cheaper. So I know people on the committee that already knew the answer to this. We're just kind of like, okay, we'll walk Tracy through this. So they were nice enough to put this whole thing together to walk some of us through it. And we started with trying to do the demolition and having new more than half and renovating less than half. And when they added up the cost, because of the cost of construction, we didn't fall within the parameters. We weren't within our budget. So then we tried to do half and half, and that still wasn't within the budget. So if you look at what we came up with, it was very little red. So you would basically be putting Band-Aids on things that are falling apart in the high school, kind of thinking that paint and furniture might just make it look nicer. And that's when we started considering the cost of building new for renovating. Now, I'm not trying to say building new is the same price or cheaper. That would not be true. But for the difference between building new and what this renovation we came up with was really not as much as I thought it would be. And that's when we decided, if we presented what you're looking at right now to the community, and you have to understand, this included Clark Hall. Like, we couldn't do this. We still had to keep Clark Hall, which we heard loud and clear. People are tired of kids having to traipse back and forth in 6 minutes between classes. So building new was not as much more as I thought it would be. So that's why we went for the big ask.
Thank
Good
you,
evening,
Tracy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica Williams, proud to serve as the principal of Lincoln High School. This is my third year in the role, fourth year in the district, and absolutely love it. I am not going to repeat what Tracy said, because she hit the nail right on the head in both of her talks. But what I will add to this slide is we also processed that it, did not take into account the feedback that we received in January and February from those community conversations. And a lot of the feedback we received in January and feedback from the community was totally valuable to us. And when we looked at this, as Tracy mentioned, the amount of blue versus red, and then the keeping of Clark Hall, and also our athletic facilities, was another piece of the feedback that we received in those January and February community conversations. So all of that went into, that decision of, along with the cost of building new versus renovating. And, we truly wouldn't get to what our community was asking for, which were those 21st century learning spaces, the safety, because I'll tell you, especially in some of the blue there in Jefferson, it's really hard to extend a stairwell that's already narrow. I mean, just the amount of thought that went into trying to figure out traffic patterns, even if we renovated, was definitely not feasible based on what we were looking at. So again, I think Tracy said a lot of what came out of our meetings, but I definitely wanted to add our community's input was not reflected in this renovation consideration appropriately.
Okay. Catherine, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would love to add on to both what Jessica and Tracy said. I think that it's worth acknowledging that the renovation solution that we were talking about did not necessarily solve some of the most important problems, which were the loss of instruction time, class time, because students were being late to class, being held up in the hallways. We can't expand the hallways, and we especially can't expand the stairwells. And so the renovation, after looking at this on paper, didn't make as much sense. The other thing I wanted to say is that everything that we have done for years has always been numbers driven. And Tracy alluded to this earlier. All the decisions that we have made have been numbers driven, based upon cost, based upon, projected population, current numbers in buildings, projected numbers in buildings. And so these have been very hard decisions, but they have always been based upon the numbers that we see. And I think also, Steve, it's worth mentioning, going back to something that you mentioned earlier about the cost of construction. I've been on this Master Planning Facilities Committee meeting for 5 years now. And one of the advantages of serving that long is being able to track the cost of construction. And I, especially recently in the last couple of years, have seen it just skyrocket. And we have somebody who works, actually 2 people who work in construction on the Master Planning Facilities Committee meetings. And when we run these numbers, one of the reasons why we are putting this on the ballot now is to insulate ourselves from further escalations of construction costs. So basically, when the construction costs are going up 12% per year, if we push it off even 6 months, we're looking at, okay, if we revisit this in May, now we have to ask for 6% more, or look at 6% reduction in what we're trying to accomplish. If we push it out a year from now, it's 12%. So really, it's all about being conscious of the numbers and trying to insulate ourselves from future cost escalations.
Thank you, Catherine, Jessica, and Tracy. So we also have Mike Verlingo here. He's our expert finance treasurer, and he'll be able to help us answer any questions that come up in the chat. I want to remind people we're going to answer questions in a second, and if you just type them into the chat, Jill Elliott, our assistant superintendent, will moderate and put the questions out, and we as a group will try to answer those questions. We also have our business director, Scott Lofton, here joining us, and Scott's in charge of a lot of the renovation projects we're doing with the PI levy that I talked about. He's doing a great job. Every summer, we have about 8 weeks to complete major projects. This past summer, we did major flooring projects in 3 buildings and HVAC systems in 2. And it's always a lot of work, things like asbestos removal, and our buildings are looking better than they have in a long time. So kudos to Scott and his team for all that work. And so we're all here to answer your questions. And I think we can get started unless somebody in the Zoom here has anything else they'd like to say before we get started with questions. Okay. Jill, is there?
Yeah, we have a few questions.
Okay.
So the first one is a question specific to levy signs, and they're wondering if we have signs ready for yards.
We're in the process of having signs made. They will be ready soon. The city actually has a 30-day, window that you're allowed to put signs up in your yard. And so we'll have them ready soon. The design is done and we just have to get them to the printer and get them back. And it'll take about, 5 or 6 days to get them back. Yeah, so there'll be signs. In fact, Catherine is going to be helping distribute signs.
And I will add that Kate, one of our levy chairs, she was trying to put the link in the chat for individuals that would like to request a yard sign. And we're having some difficulty getting the link to show up, but we'll make sure it's there before the end of the evening. So if you're interested in one, you can request one there.
And we really appreciate people wanting to get signs. I think the important thing tonight is to answer questions regarding to the levy. We want to keep this less about advocacy and more about information. So we know that folks will have a lot of questions. I think one big question we've gotten and we've addressed a little bit is why now? The timing feels and seems horrible with COVID-19 and the drop in the economy and the unemployment rate. And one of the things we looked at, in the next 5 years, we're going to grow at about a little bit over 800 students. So by the 26-27 school year, it would take us 4 years to build a new high school and a number of years to do these renovations. And so our growth is going to hit and create even more capacity issues in the next 3 to 5 years. And so we couldn't really afford to wait, because what it's going to mean perhaps is trailers and overcrowded classrooms and hallways. So we are not tone deaf to the timing. That we recognize that the timing for this is awful, but our growth is coming. And what's amazing is the real estate market in Gahanna and Central Ohio is unbelievably hot, even in this economy. I think, Catherine, you're a realtor, so you know that firsthand.
That's correct.
And so are there any other questions, Jill?
Next one. I feel there is already a lot of misinformation in the community related to this levy. Is there a plan to try to stay ahead of this? And then a follow-up, it says specifically, there seems to be little understanding in the public between the difference between Gahanna city income tax versus school taxes. So how can we take care of messaging this properly?
Yeah, that's a good question. And if that's a confusion, we definitely need to address it. We will have a website that will address a number of issues in an FAQ. And so we'll make sure we answer that. Income tax is what helps cities survive. And right now, I think things are getting a little bit better with our businesses in the community, but a city's income is really based on a percentage of what businesses are doing. And so it has been tough for our city and cities across Central Ohio, and the country. So that is we do not have an income tax. Some school districts, as on the chart I showed you, actually have property taxes and income taxes that fund their school. We do not get funded by income tax. Our funding is property tax, and that is what makes or breaks the funding for a school district. And right now in Gahanna and Central Ohio, property values are rising, and so soon we expect the property values in our community, the overall assessed value, to rise by about 19%. And Mike, would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So as property values increase, there is an offsetting reduction in millage that is calculated by the county auditor. So what happens is, due to House Bill 920 back in the 70s, it tends to keep the amount of income that schools receive due to inflationary increases in home values constant. So we do not see much in terms of increased revenues. We do get a small increase based on inside millage, which for us is 4.4 mils, but that's a small percentage of the total millage collected.
And it might be important, Mike, to address now that right now, in November on the ballot, this millage will be 10.69. But once property values are assessed and they go up in our community, what does that mean to the millage that we will need to raise this 250 million?
Okay, so because the ballot is being placed, or the levy is being placed on the ballot in November, we must use the 2019 tax values that are on the books by the county auditor. When those values increase, that will mean we will need less millage to service the debt that will be issued for the cost of the construction. So the millage will reduce, and we're estimating currently right now between 1.3 and 1.5 mils based upon the 19% increase in home values. So the 10.69 mil levy based on 2019 values will decrease to about 9.1 to 9.3 mils based on the 2020 values.
Okay. So to raise this 250 million, the millage will actually be less because the assessed value of property in our community is going to go up. Is that right, Mike?
Correct.
Okay. Mike, did you want to say anything about the operating portion of this levy?
Well, the operating portion, the 4.26 mils is our current estimate in order to maintain the district operations through the forecast period of the next at least 4 years, and maintain a cash balance reserve of 60 days operating cash, which is the goal of the district, to maintain some stability with operating funds. That is dependent upon many factors, growth in the number of students, increase in property values, increase in tax collections, the amount of tax collections, delinquency rates, many things factor into how much revenues we receive, as well as what our costs are or what they may be in the future. So the forecast is required to be filed with the state of Ohio every 6 months. And there'll be another forecast being generated in the month of November to be filed by the end of November with updated information. But based upon the forecast that was compiled in May, 4.6 mils is needed to maintain operations for the next 4 years.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Jill, any other questions?
Sure. The next one is, what is the alternative to passing the levy? If enrollment continues to grow, what alternatives are contemplated if the levy does not pass?
Well, if in terms of capacity, we right now we have trailers at Goshen Lane, High Point, and Blacklick, and so we would likely have to add more of those to deal with our population growth. So by 25, 26, our population will grow by 827 students. Now, we should say that Lincoln Elementary, because we're building it to house 750 students, at the elementary level, we will level off a little bit, and we will need to redistrict and bring students from some of our more crowded elementaries. So for instance, right now at Goshen Lane, there's over 600 students, and we have a trailer there. So as we bring Lincoln Elementary online, that'll stem some of the overcrowding of our elementaries, and that'll last a little bit for a couple of years. But then we begin to kind of go over capacity again. So if you look at, I'll go back to the slide that has that at the beginning here. There it is. So if you notice, as we bring Lincoln Elementary online, we're still over capacity, but it dips a little because we're building Lincoln to house 750 kids. Most of our elementary schools hold 500 or so. And when they reach a tipping point of over 500, they become over crowded. And so you can see that this helps for a few years, but then we kind of will begin to kind of go over capacity as the years continue. And so that's why we need additions to Blacklick and High Point. The enrollment study that we got this data from was done by a company called Cooperative Strategies. They do this work across the country, and they work in large school districts, county school districts in Georgia, Florida, California, and they're very experienced. We're lucky that they're here in Central Ohio. They're actually, they have offices around the country, but there's actually an office in Hilliard. And they gave us a study. This study is on our website, and you can access it, and you can see the level of detail that they gave us. Again, it's a forecast, so it's a predictor. It's not going to predict exactly the number of students, but it's going to give us some real good data on what our growth is likely to be. And I neglected to mention that our growth, we tried to determine in this enrollment study how many houses in Jefferson Township are likely to be built a year. Is it 100? Is it 125, 150, or 200? Working with Cooperative Strategies, we settled on the number of 125 houses a year. One of the reasons square footage price is so expensive in Central Ohio is there's a labor shortage. There's a shortage of carpenters and plumbers and masons and electricians in Central Ohio. And because of that, it pushes the price up because there's a higher demand for labor. What was interesting when we went out to bid for different packages for Lincoln Elementary, the plumbing, the electrical, we only had one electrical contractor bid on that. There is so much work for electrical contractors and other trades in Central Ohio that it pushes the prices up. So when we considered, how many new houses will come online in Jefferson Township, we knew it wouldn't be 150 or 200 because there maybe just isn't the labor to complete that. But we thought 125 was a good number, and that's what these numbers in the study are based on. And so in 25, 26, we'll grow by about 827 students. And by 2038, 39, we're going to be up at least, 1,400 plus students. And so the growth is coming, and it will overwhelm us sort of gradually, and then suddenly we'll be, wondering what we're going to do with all our new students if we don't expand our learning spaces very, very soon. So Joe, I'm not sure I answered that question completely. Do you want to repeat it just to make sure?
Hey, Steve, could I just say something real quick before?
Sure.
So the question was, what's the plan if the levy fails?
Right.
And as the committee member, we've talked about this. And if it fails in the fall, I do believe we'll turn around and put it back on in the spring to try one more time. But the truth of the matter is you're the community and you get to decide. And if the answer is no, then Gahanna will do what Gahanna does. And we have great teachers in the system, and we will have more kids in our class. And I feel like one thing that's different this time with Mr. Barrett is in these committees, he's always saying, this is up to the community. This isn't us. We present it and the community gets to tell us yes or no. And, the truth is, we'll have more kids in the class. We'll have trailers that kids will have to go to trailers. We will be overcrowded. Teachers will be stretched. I don't want to say the quality of the education will go down because I think we have really good teachers and I have really good colleagues they always rise to the occasion. But to put more kids in a classroom for a teacher, just everything becomes harder, but we will do it. So in answer to the question, we just go, we just keep moving forward, and we will be overcrowded and we'll have lots of kids. But there's, there's always these threats. If the levy doesn't pass, then, we're going to have 35 in a class for first grade, and your kid's not going to be bused because we're going to have to make busing go to half a mile, or, all those in the levies past have felt like threats to get you to vote for the levy. But I feel like this time it's not threats. It's just, we will have to cut costs. We will have to cut corners. We will have to figure out what stays and what goes, who stays and what goes, and we'll do it. And we'll do it because you gave us the answer of no, not as a punishment. Just, we will have to go back to the drawing board and figure out how will we do it with the money we have, and we'll keep the buildings that we have.
Yeah. I think, Tracy, you hit the nail on the head. Our teachers are fantastic, and we're going to deliver the most rich and robust education we can with whatever we have. We did some focus groups with students in every building. We got kind of interrupted by the school closure in March, but we were working on our strategic plan. And, at the high school, we were kind of curious because we had 50 kids working on how do we, what do we do well? What do we need to do better from their perspective? And one of the things we were amazed by is they never mentioned the building. They never mentioned the how old it was, how crowded it was, because our teachers and our administrators and our counselors and our support staff engage them. And great education is about people engaging with one another. So our kids are getting a great experience. And, if you look at this chart, it will take about 4 years to build a new high school. By the time, if we pass this levy and we start, planning in 2021, it'll take us to 24, 25 before we can actually finish the project. So we'll be at 98% capacity. And as Jessica can tell you, as soon as the bell rings, we're over capacity because our hallways are just burgeoning with students. So at the end of the day, we're going to offer the best education we can, no matter what. The operating part of this, if we fail this, we will have to make reductions for the 21-22 school year, and that'll involve staff across the district, maintenance workers, bus drivers, teachers, all kinds of staffing reductions that we'll look at. And we'll look at it in a way where we try to make those reductions as far away from the classroom as possible. But what Gahanna has done well for years is really focused on classroom instruction, probably not enough on facilities, and we're addressing that now. We had architects and engineers come in and do a PDF of what each of our buildings need over time, over the next 15 years. And Scott Lofton and his team are working on that. And that's when we talk about, new HVAC systems, renovating bathrooms, gradually over time, we're going to make our buildings, very functional in terms of systems. But we have a lot of work to do. So any other questions, Jill?
Yes. So I think we actually answered the next two. Just wanted to acknowledge them. What happens if what's the plan to go forward if it fails? So we addressed that. And then if the levy passes, when would the new school be operational? So you addressed that one. The next one is how long is the proposed construction time? So you asked that, but the follow-up is where would the kids go in the interim?
So in working with Moody Nolan, and they build high schools across the country, Seattle, Washington, D.C., in urban downtown areas, and we've been working with them. They showed us a prospectus of a book of possibilities of 9 versions of what we might do. We've drilled down to 3. In the next couple of sessions, we have 3 more of these. We're going to just show you some of their drawings. What we don't want you to think is anything they show us, we're going to settle on. We want to, if this passes, we want to, if the community gives us permission to do this, we want to develop what the community wants in terms of what the high school looks like, where it can go on the site, you know, and all of the planning for it. We want it to be very much about community engagement. But we are confident, based on their experience, that we can build on this site in the back of the practice fields, where the football team practices now, where Lincoln Elementary is, where the tennis courts are, the softball field back there. We're confident that we can do a construction over a 4-year period that's going to create minimal, some disruption, but minimal disruption to the school day over the next 4 years.
Okay, next question. How many years until we are back to where we are now, overcrowded and needing more space? Gahanna seems to keep growing in apartments and houses despite the lack of land.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. We're looking at this project as a 50-year kind of a 50-year project to kind of provide the facilities that our school district needs. Our enrollment study goes out to 2068. And, you know, in terms of apartments, our enrollment study kind of looked at that, and just over 20% of our students come from apartments. I think sometimes people think that an overwhelming majority of students and families in Gahanna come from apartments. When you look at the Park Apartments and the other apartments on Hamilton Road, they're very expensive for families. And so it's actually probably cheaper to buy than it is to rent an apartment. And so we don't really, I think the last time I looked at the park, and it's been a while, so that might have changed, but I think there was less than 15 students there. And so we do have students in apartments out on Broad Street, so there's more students that come from apartments in that area, but it is not usually what people think. There isn't much more land to build in Gahanna, and so pretty much this enrollment study focused on the growth happening in Jefferson Township. And I think that growth is going to drive us to about 2,800 students, and then we begin to go decline. And it's fascinating to listen to the demographers, basically the people who do these enrollment studies. They're geography majors, and they use lots of amazing tools to kind of do these predictions. And we're going to top out at 2,800 students, and we think this plan will provide for our growth long after Jefferson Township is built out.
Next question. Can you discuss the thought process in deciding to expand the size of existing elementary schools versus building one or more new elementary schools?
Yeah, we looked at that, and when we look at, that came up, a couple of times in our committee conversations. We also looked at staffing needs. So one of the things we looked at, like if we were to build a second high school, our interim treasurer a couple of years ago, Steve Vasic, ran the numbers, and I think it was 1.3 million a year we would obviously have taken some staff from Lincoln High School and moved it to the new high school, but the additional staff it would have taken to run that building would have been about 1.3 million a year. And so when you bring a new building online, you're going to have to hire even more staff for your growth. We have quite a bit of acreage at Blacklick. And so we looked at, okay, could you put another elementary there? But it didn't really make sense to have two elementaries right in the same proximity. One of the things that came up was also looking at why not, a question came up, why not build one middle school out in the township, perhaps, instead of doing these additions. And we kind of defaulted to additions at all three middle schools. But that is an interesting kind of line of reasoning that, deserves some attention. But I think at the end of the day, we don't have land to build a new elementary right now unless we put it right next to Blacklick. And that would have been a challenge with transportation. The other thing is when you build a new school, it increases transportation costs. So I think that's the reasoning behind the additions instead of building a new elementary.
Hey, Steve, can I add something about that
Yeah.
Blacklick parcel? It is L-shaped, and if I remember correctly, I don't think that it has multiple egress. And so because of the shape of that parcel, it might be large, but it's strangely shaped and not necessarily very conducive to adding another large building. So that, it has some overlays that provide some limitations on, expanding it much.
The next question, why not wait until May for the levy when the effects of COVID have lessened? Chances of a levy passing in May seem to be greater than a November date.
Yeah, so that is something we considered. I think the challenge though is we know this is a challenging proposition for our community. Asking for permission to do this work at this time, there's no worse time in my experience in my career over 30 years of going on the ballot. But when you look at the trajectory of our growth, what we don't want to be caught in the next few years is being overcrowded, and we didn't go out for this levy at least twice before we have to make reductions in staffing for the 21-22 school year. So we know the timing of this is not good. I think waiting till May would have given us one chance to pass before the 21-22 school year. And if it failed then what would happen is we would make all kinds of staffing reductions, and it would take us a number of years to recover from that in terms of, reestablishing our programming. Whenever you have to make significant cuts, you in ways that you'd never want to do, you dismantle programming. And so we know that this is a difficult time. We considered just doing it in May, but we want to communicate this message, ask the community for permission. And if it says no, like Tracy said, we're asking for permission, and we're going to offer the best education we can with the great teachers and staff we have. But the need hasn't really changed, and the growth especially is upon us. And we're already a little bit late to the ball game, as you can see with our capacity issues already. And so the timing is not great when you consider COVID-19, but the growth is still coming.
So the next question, I believe you touched on it, but I'm not sure if you want to add anything. You mentioned homes, but will the new buildings accommodate all of the new apartments being built at this time in the district, especially with many schools already at capacity?
Yeah, so the enrollment study looked at multifamily dwellings, looked at single family homes, looked at even some of the projects built for senior living. And so the prediction is based on all of those different housing developments. And so, yeah, so the study looked at all of that. The study is really a fascinating thing. And if you have a chance to look on our facilities page of our website, you'll see that all of that was factored in.
Thank you. Next question, since some kids thrive in a remote learning environment and some teachers may prefer it, is there any thought in offering online classes within Gahanna after COVID?
I mean, I think we're going to learn a lot from the great work our teachers are doing. They've been very nimble. They've been very innovative. You know, we've been talking about blended learning, which is a term we use in education for in classroom time and online time. A lot of universities have offered that type of learning for a long time. We're experiencing, you know, lots of innovation right now. And so we will, I think about this all the time, you know, when hopefully COVID subsides, we'll be able to sit down and with all the stress and decisions we have to make in this very fluid and dynamic situation, there are some things we're learning that we will use when COVID's no longer here. It's hard to say what those are, but I think our parents are seeing a big difference in the online distance learning we're doing now versus what we were able to do with just a few days notice in the spring. And I'm really proud of the work teachers are doing, the applications they're using, the engagements they're doing. And we know there's also a lot of angst and anxiety around transitioning to our hybrid plan. And we're going to have a Q&A tomorrow night at 6:30 about that.
The focus of this levy is on the physical structures. Does it also contemplate technology needs? How will this levy help our students be prepared with the latest in technology?
So we're pretty proud of the fact that we were, you know, a district that went 1-to-1, even K through 12, pretty early on. And, you know, one of the things that really helped us get there was our Gahanna Jefferson Educational Foundation funding innovative grants that teachers wrote to use Google Classroom and Chromebooks. And, you know, we're always innovating, and we have a great tech team led by Matt Blackwell, our tech director. So we're going to continue to try to innovate. Much of what you're seeing in the improvement in online learning is teachers using better applications to engage kids with. And so we're always looking to innovate and use different applications to create the most engagement we can. And so, you know, Chromebooks are kind of in vogue right now, but I'm sure as we're speaking, right, that there's going to be other options sometime soon. Sometimes they lag a little bit. They don't have the processing power we'd like sometimes. And so, you know, looking to the future, I'm sure either Chromebooks will be made more robust or another device will come online, but we'll be on the forefront of looking at that. It's interesting, you know, there's been a lot of internet issues now that Columbus has started with online learning for close to 50,000 students. The same thing happened in Northeast Ohio recently. The internet in areas went down. Google is really quick to make adjustments and course correct when that happens, but we don't always see it coming. And so I think tech companies are going to learn from what has been happening lately. And for us, I mean, one of the most important things we did recently is we went from 1 gig of connectivity to 5. So we increased our connectivity, our bandwidth by 5 times recently, just so that we can handle the load of teachers and kids being online in the way that they are.
Steve, I would also add that with some of the additional vocational programming that we hope to be able to offer at the high school, that would potentially be an area where we would be able to expand our students' repertoire and knowledge and skill set with regards to technology.
Yeah.
Okay, and it looks like the last question at this time is it fair to say the most urgent need right now is middle school capacity, while the high school is the driver of the size of the levy request?
Yeah, I would say that's a fair assessment, But I would just point out in this chart here that it takes 4 years to, so you can look at the high school numbers, and we're definitely going to be increasing in capacity and have issues really, really soon. In fact, Tracy teaches at Middle School West, and we recently redistricted, and that has taken some of the pressure off of Middle School West and especially Middle School South. But I mean, there were times, Tracy, you guys at Middle School West were like pushing 650 students, and it's difficult. Tracy knows well that it's hard to teach with that many kids in a building that's not made for 650 kids. So you can see, yeah, the capacity is increasing, but if you look here, our capacity will quickly be at 100%. And if we were able to kind of get permission from our community to build, a new high school would come online right as we're reaching capacity. And I think, this is really about classroom space. The video I showed is really about what it's like to go to our high school and move from one class to another. So we're already over capacity at our high school because our hallways are really overcrowded. But I would say, yes, I see that argument that really the middle school is going to be over capacity more quickly than the high school and the elementaries. And part of that is because Lincoln Elementary is coming online in 21, 22. But our high school is, if you had a chance, and this will be on the website, if you can watch that entire video, you will see what I'm talking about and how patient our kids are moving from place to place. But it is really difficult between each class period.
Steve, can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah.
So the other thing with that question, we did consider as a committee, because originally before 2018, we were going to make this a 3-phase. So it would be the elementary schools, the new Lincoln, then it would be the middle schools, and adding some to the elementary schools, but the 3 middle schools. And then a third levy would be the high school. So we did consider separating these back in 2018. And I think Steve alluded to it tonight, but we heard loud and clear from the community that they didn't want to wait that long for a high school. The people that were willing to vote for it said, my kids will maybe not even get 1 year in that high school if we wait. So then we decided, okay, we'll look at the 3 levies, divide it out, go to 2 levies. We did the 1 levy in 2018 that was not only Lincoln Elementary, but it was a lot of upgrades to the elementaries and the middle schools. And then the second levy, which we're looking at right now, is increasing the capacity at middle schools and some elementaries and the new high school. So that's how we kind of divided it out. As a committee, we spent one night, we met every single week for, I bet, 5 months. And every week we just chewed up all of this because it just seemed like this was going to be a really big levy. And what we ended up with was, do we go back to 3? Like, do we take this second levy and split it and do the high school later? Well, the energy right now in our community is the high school. I just have to admit it. I'm a middle school teacher, but literally the energy when you talk to people is the new high school. They're tired of going to these other high schools that have these beautiful facilities, and Gahanna's waited too long. In fact, I think our levy campaign it's our time, because Gahanna has waited and waited and waited. So to put the high school off didn't make sense because that's not what the community wanted. But to do the high school and put the middle schools off makes no sense based on the slide in front of you with the numbers. So we went round and round and round, and then just ended up with, we're going to put the big levy on because we feel like that's what the community was saying. So I get what your question is. I totally agree, but it's really what we feel like the community saying they want. We'll find out, I guess, in November if we heard correctly, but we really do believe this is what you're asking for.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I think in the community conversations around what to do about a high school, what was loud and clear is that we have critical needs that need to be addressed at the high school that are beyond overcapacity. It's inefficient. It's structurally, just the logistics of getting from one side of the building to the other. the HVAC systems, the electrical systems. You know, some rooms don't have enough electrical for the year 2020. There are just lots of inefficiencies there that need to be corrected. So it's not just about capacity, but capacity is a big issue. Jessica, did you want to say anything about that?
Sorry, trying to get myself unmuted there. I would wholeheartedly agree about capacity in all aspects. I mean, even when you think about the classroom, because of how our building is designed, 3 different building designs plus Clark Hall, some rooms allow us to have, greater capacity when it comes to students in the classroom, and others don't. And I think it also shows in our special programs that we have. And as Mrs. Elliott alluded to with the career tech programs and some of the programming that a new high school would allow us to offer, I think we would also be able to offer more opportunities to students, although we already have a robust curriculum. And so the hallways definitely, no matter how you slice it, are crowded, as well as the cafeteria space. And so just trying to find enough space for everybody to be able to do the things that they are passionate about and love in our school, sometimes presents some challenges that we work through. But I always look through the lens of, definitely our kids deserve this. So.
Thank you.
Steve, can I add as well? We talked about the inefficiencies of the building, but what we haven't talked about really at length is some of the safety concerns. I know that when you did your presentation a couple of months ago, that there was one slide that showed the scaffolding that was built outside to protect kids from the falling pieces of the exterior of the high school. And that's not the only example. And so safety is definitely a consideration as well.
Yeah. Yeah, what Catherine's talking about is the facade at the oldest part of the building on Hamilton, parallel to Hamilton, was, kind of falling apart after winter break, and Scott Lofton and his team had to, get a company out with scaffolds, and they had to peel off layer after layer of plaster because it was literally falling and could hit kids. So Jessica and her team had to adjust as we came back from winter break, entry to the building, and it took several weeks, and it cost way more than we would have wanted to pay to handle that. I think it was something like, Scott, $15,000. And it just, we have things like that at the high school that come up all the time. Any other questions, Jill?
No other questions. Mm-mm.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine and Tracy, Jessica, Mike, and Scott and Jill for moderating the questions. We appreciate people tuning in tonight. We will have 3 more sessions. Well, we'll go through this short presentation, and in our next couple of sessions, we'll show you what our architects, Moody Nolan, have come up with just some sketches and ideas of what could be. Nothing definitive. Again, we want to deliberate and have dialogue with the community on what a final high school solution would look like, but they're going to show us 3 possibilities. And so if you want to join us again, that would be great. And we appreciate you spending time with us tonight. So thanks so much. And thanks to Matt Blackwell for helping us with the Zoom. He's our tech director. So have a good night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.